In a quiet neighborhood on the edge of the city, a young teenager walked down the street. He was just finishing his shift at the grocery store, where he worked part-time after school to help his mom cover their bills. The streets were nearly empty, with only a few cars passing by. He felt tired but proud. He was putting in hours to save up for college and dreaming of better days ahead. Little did he know, this was about to be a night he'd never forget. As he walked, he noticed a police car following him slowly. He tried to brush it off, telling himself it was nothing. Just act normal, he thought. He'd heard stories from friends about what could happen when you were a young black kid walking alone at night, but he'd never really thought it could happen to him. He kept his hands in his pockets, his head down, and walked steadily, just trying to get home. After a few blocks, the police car sped up and pulled to the side of the road, right in front of him. The officer inside called out, "Hey, you there. Stop." The boy's heart started to race. He stopped as he was told, trying to stay calm and respectful. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong. He hadn't taken anything from the store. He wasn't carrying anything dangerous. He was just a kid on his way home. The officer got out of the car and started walking toward him with a hard, serious look on his face. "What are you doing out here so late?" the officer demanded, looking him up and down like he was trouble. The boy kept his hands visible, hoping to make it clear he wasn't a threat. "I just finished my shift at the grocery store," he said quietly, keeping his eyes on the ground. He knew better than to make any sudden moves or talk back. But the officer didn't seem to be listening. He went on questioning him, each question harsher than the last. "You're acting suspicious," the officer said, his voice sharp. "I think you match the description of someone we're looking for." The boy was confused and scared. "It's just me, sir. I haven't done anything," he replied, his voice shaking slightly. But it was as if the officer didn't care. He was determined to treat the boy as if he was guilty of something, even though there was no reason to believe he was. Before the boy knew it, the officer was forcing him to the ground, his face pressed against the hard pavement. "Stay down and don't move," the officer yelled. The boy felt pain shoot through his side, and he struggled to breathe. He was trying to stay calm, trying to keep himself together, but it was hard. People were gathering now, some watching with shocked expressions, others pulling out their phones to record what was happening. In those few moments on the ground, he felt a mix of emotions he'd never felt before. He was scared, yes, but he was also angry. Why did this happen to kids like him so often? Why did he have to feel unsafe just for walking home from work? He could hear the officer's voice above him, still ordering him to stay down, but inside, he made a silent promise. He wasn't going to let this go. He would find a way to make this right, not just for himself, but for every kid who had been made to feel small, scared, or less than human for no reason. The teenager lay there on the ground, his cheek pressed against the cold pavement. His heart was pounding, partly from the fear of what was happening, and partly from the disbelief that this was really happening to him. He hadn't done anything wrong, yet here he was, held down, humiliated, and surrounded by people he didn't know. He could feel his arms aching under the officer's grip, and he struggled to stay calm. He always heard his mom say, "If you ever have to deal with the police, just stay calm and don't resist." He repeated those words in his head, hoping they'd help him keep his cool. The officer above him continued to bark commands, telling him not to move and accusing him of acting suspicious. But the teenager knew there was nothing suspicious about him walking home from work. He tried to explain, his voice shaking, "I was just walking home. I didn't do anything." But the officer didn't seem to care. He was treating him like a suspect, as if he'd committed some terrible crime, and it made the boy's stomach twist with frustration. As he lay there, he became aware of the people watching. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk nearby, murmuring to each other, some looking shocked, others recording on their phones. He heard someone say, "He's just a kid," and another voice saying, "This is too much." He couldn't see their faces, But he knew that those people were watching every move the officer made. And he knew that those phone cameras were catching everything on video. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt a small bit of hope. Maybe someone would help him. Maybe those videos would show that he was just a kid trying to go home. The boy walked home slowly, feeling a strange mix of anger and exhaustion. His hands were still sore from the tightness of the handcuffs, and he kept replaying the scene in his mind. Each time, he felt the same frustration bubbling up. He had done nothing wrong, yet he'd been treated like a criminal. His mother's face appeared in his thoughts, and he imagined the look she'd have when she saw him walk through the door like this. As he finally reached home, he took a deep breath before stepping inside. His mom looked up from the table and immediately noticed something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, worry filling her voice as she saw the marks on his wrists. He hesitated, not wanting to make her upset, but he knew he had to tell her everything. He explained how he'd been stopped, accused, and forced to the ground. As he talked, his mom's face changed from worry to anger, her eyes filling with tears. "This isn't fair," she said, her voice shaking. "You're a good kid. You shouldn't have to go through this." She hugged him tightly, and for a moment, he let himself feel the sadness that had been hiding under his anger. Being home with someone who cared made him realize just how alone he had felt in those awful moments on the street. After a while, his mom pulled back and looked at him with determination. "We're not letting this go," she said firmly. "This has to stop." She told him they'd reach out to people who could help, maybe even talk to a lawyer. She explained that there were people who fought for cases like his, people who would stand by him and make sure his voice was heard. The boy felt a glimmer of hope at her words. He had been feeling powerless, but now, maybe there was a chance to make things right. His mom contacted a community organization that helped people in situations like his. They connected them with a lawyer who specialized in cases of injustice. The lawyer listened patiently as he told his story, asking questions that helped him remember every detail. The lawyer explained that his story was not uncommon, and that others had gone through similar things. But she also said something he hadn't expected. By sharing your story, you can help change things for others. People need to know what happened to you. She told him that the videos people had taken would be valuable evidence, showing exactly what had happened. The boy listened, feeling a new sense of purpose. He realized that this wasn't just about what had happened to him. It was about making sure it didn't keep happening to others. If his story could help, then he wanted to tell it. He wanted people to know that this wasn't right, and that kids like him shouldn't have to live in fear. In the days that followed, he worked with the lawyer and the community group, sharing his experience in a way that felt powerful. News of what had happened spread, and soon, people in his community were talking about it. He wasn't just a kid who had been stopped and humiliated. He was becoming a voice for change. His story gave people strength, and he found that speaking up made him feel stronger too. He didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but he felt ready to face it. He was no longer the quiet kid who kept his head down. He was someone who had been hurt, yes, but he was also someone who wouldn't back down. He was standing up, not just for himself, but for every kid who had ever felt the same fear, the same frustration. And he knew, deep down, that he was doing the right thing. The boy's story began to spread quickly through the neighborhood and beyond. People were shocked, angry, and heartbroken when they heard how he'd been treated. Some of them recognized him as the quiet kid who worked hard at the grocery store, always polite and respectful. They couldn't understand why he'd been treated this way. Neighbors started to share his story on social media, and before long, it was reaching people outside of his community. He was overwhelmed by the response. At first, he wasn't sure how to feel about the attention. It was strange seeing so many people talk about what had happened to him, people he'd never even met. But the messages he received from strangers helped him feel less alone. People wrote to him saying they'd had similar experiences, and some even thanked him for speaking up. It made him realize that his story was part of something much bigger, that he wasn't the only one who had felt afraid and helpless. As more people started to hear about it, local news reporters reached out, wanting to interview him. He was nervous about speaking on camera, but his mom encouraged him, reminding him how powerful his story could be. "This isn't just for you," she said gently. "It's for everyone who's gone through this." So he agreed, and soon he found himself sitting in front of a camera, telling his story to a news anchor who listened with sympathy and care. He spoke honestly about how scared he'd been, how humiliated he felt being forced to the ground, and how he tried so hard to stay calm and respectful, even when he was treated unfairly. He talked about his dreams for the future, his love for his family, and how he'd never imagined something like this could happen to him. By the end of the interview, he was holding back tears, but he felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. After the interview aired, his story took on a life of its own. People from all over were sharing it, commenting on it, and talking about it. His social media was flooded with messages of support, people calling him brave and strong for standing up. But it wasn't just strangers who reached out. Some local leaders and activists contacted his family, offering their support and promising to help make sure the incident wouldn't be ignored. Then, something happened that surprised him. People in his community organized a peaceful rally to show their support. They gathered with signs that read things like justice and respect for all, and stand together against injustice. The rally was filled with people of all ages and backgrounds, and even though he was nervous, he decided to attend. Standing in the crowd, seeing people come together for him, and for others who had been treated unfairly, filled him with a deep sense of hope. At the rally, he was invited to speak in front of everyone. The microphone felt heavy in his hands, and his voice shook at first, but he took a deep breath and began to share his experience once again. He told the crowd how much their support meant to him, how grateful he was to have a community that cared, and how he wanted to work toward a future where kids like him didn't have to live in fear of being treated unfairly. By the time he finished speaking, he could see tears in the eyes of some people in the crowd, and he felt the strength of their support. He was no longer just one voice. He was part of a movement, a collective call for respect and justice. The rally wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the whole community standing up together, showing that they wouldn't accept this treatment for anyone. The boy realized that even though he'd been hurt, he'd also been given an opportunity to create change, and he was determined to make the most of it. In the days after the rally, the boy felt a new sense of purpose. He no longer felt like the quiet kid who tried to keep his head down. He felt like he had a voice, a powerful one that others wanted to hear. The support from his community and the messages he kept receiving from people near and far filled him with a sense of belonging and strength. His story wasn't just his own anymore. It had become a symbol for everyone who had felt scared, hurt, or unfairly judged. One afternoon, he met with his lawyer and some community leaders at a local coffee shop. They talked about the next steps, about how his case could help push for change in the way police treated young people like him. The lawyer explained how his story, along with the video footage taken by the bystanders, would be crucial in building a strong case. She told him that they could use this case to demand accountability and ask the police department to change its practices. The boy listened, feeling a mix of nerves and hope. He knew this journey would be hard, and it wouldn't be solved overnight. But he felt that if his story could stop even one kid from going through what he had, it would be worth it. He agreed to move forward with the case, knowing he had his family, his lawyer, and his community behind him. As word of his case spread, more people started sharing their own stories. A woman from a nearby town contacted him, explaining how her son had gone through something similar, and how she'd felt powerless to do anything about it at the time. An older man who had lived in the area his whole life stopped him on the street one day, patting him on the shoulder and saying, "Keep going. You're doing this for all of us." With every story he heard, the boy felt his resolve grow stronger. He wasn't just standing up for himself anymore. He was standing up for all these people who had lived with this fear for years. The local news continued to follow his story, interviewing others who had been impacted by unfair treatment and bringing attention to the need for change. People began calling on local officials to address these issues, to look at their policies, and to hold officers accountable. It became clear that this wasn't just one boy's story. It was a movement calling for fairness, respect, and dignity. One day, he received a call from his lawyer, who sounded excited. She explained that the police department had agreed to start a review of their policies. They would be looking into their practices, training, and the way they engaged with the community. It wasn't a guarantee of change, but it was a start, a sign that they were being heard. The lawyer told him that this kind of progress was rare, and that his courage had played a huge role in making it happen. Hearing this news, the boy felt a wave of relief. It was just one step, but it was a meaningful one. The journey wasn't over. There was still work to do. But he could see that change was possible. It was hard to believe that just weeks before, he had been lying on the ground, feeling powerless and alone. Now, he was part of something so much bigger, something that gave hope not just to him, but to everyone in his community. As he walked home that evening, he thought about everything that had happened and everything that lay ahead. He knew there would still be challenges, and there might be people who wouldn't understand or support him. But he was ready. He felt a sense of pride, knowing he was doing the right thing, not just for himself, but for everyone who deserved to feel safe and respected. With every step he took, he knew he was walking toward a future that felt just a little bit brighter. And he promised himself that no matter what happened, he would keep going, keep speaking up, and keep standing strong for what was right. Over the next few weeks, the boy's life changed even more. He found himself speaking up in ways he never imagined. Community groups began inviting him to meetings where people gathered to discuss fairness, respect, and ways to make sure no one else had to go through what he did. They wanted him to share his experience, and he soon realized that his story was opening people's eyes, even to things they hadn't noticed before. At one of the meetings, he saw familiar faces, people from his own neighborhood who he'd never talked to much before. He was surprised to see how many of them cared and wanted to help. Some of them shared their own stories, talking about moments when they'd felt treated unfairly or judged without reason. One older woman stood up and talked about how she'd been mistreated many years ago, but had kept it quiet, thinking no one would care. Now, seeing a young person stand up and speak out, she felt like maybe things could finally start to change. Hearing these stories made the boy feel more connected to his community than ever. He realized that his actions were encouraging others to find their own voices, and this gave him a deep sense of responsibility. He didn't want to let them down. He felt like he was part of something much bigger, a movement that could bring lasting change. One evening, his lawyer called with an update. She had arranged a meeting with some local officials and leaders from the police department. They wanted to hear from him directly. He felt nervous, thinking about sitting across from people in positions of authority, but he knew this was a big chance. His mom gave him a reassuring look, telling him he had every right to be there and that his words were important. When the day of the meeting arrived, he dressed carefully and reminded himself to stay calm and focused. As he walked into the meeting room, he felt the weight of his story, but he also felt the support of everyone who believed in him. Seated around the table were officials, police representatives, and a few community leaders. They greeted him politely, but he could sense they were interested in hearing what he had to say. The boy took a deep breath and began to speak, describing what had happened that night when he was forced to the ground. He explained how he'd felt, scared, confused, and hurt by the unfair treatment. But he didn't stop there. He told them about the support he'd received from his community, about the rally, and about how many people had come forward to share their own stories. He looked at each person in the room, making sure they understood that this wasn't just his story. It was a call for change from the whole community. The officials listened quietly, some taking notes, others nodding along. By the time he finished, there was a silence in the room, a pause that felt heavy with meaning. One of the police leaders spoke up, saying that he'd heard many stories, but that hearing directly from a young person made it feel more real, more urgent. He admitted that there were things that needed to change and promised to take his words seriously. After the meeting, the boy felt both relieved and exhausted. He didn't know exactly what would come of it, but he knew he had spoken his truth. Walking out of that room, he felt lighter, as if he'd finally let go of the weight he'd been carrying since that night. Over the following days, he kept in touch with the lawyer and community leaders. They were making plans to keep the conversation going, to keep the pressure on, so that the promises made in that meeting wouldn't be forgotten. The boy felt proud, knowing he was a part of something real, something that could bring lasting change. As he laid in bed that night, he thought about all the people who had supported him, from his mom to the strangers who had reached out online. He knew the journey wasn't over, and that there would be more challenges ahead. But for the first time, he felt truly hopeful. He had found his voice, and he had discovered a strength within himself that he hadn't known before. Now he was determined to keep using it, not just for himself, but for everyone who wanted a fairer, kinder world. In the weeks that followed, the boy's story continued to resonate with people across the community. He had thought that, after the rally and the meeting with officials, things might slow down. But instead, the momentum kept building. People were inspired by his courage, and even more individuals began sharing their own stories of unfair treatment. One day, he received an invitation to speak at a school event focused on respect and equality. The invitation surprised him, but he knew it was a chance to reach even more people, especially kids like him who might feel overlooked. Standing in front of students, teachers, and parents, he felt nervous at first, but then he remembered why he was doing this. His story wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever felt judged or mistreated. As he spoke, he noticed how the room grew quiet. The students listened carefully, and he could tell his story was hitting close to home for some of them. He talked about the importance of respect and how powerful it can be when people come together for fairness and justice. He reminded them that their voices mattered, no matter how young they were, and that they shouldn't be afraid to speak up if something felt wrong. When he finished, the crowd clapped, and he felt a warm sense of connection with everyone in the room. After the event, some of the students approached him, thanking him for sharing his story. A few told him about times they had felt bullied or left out, and how they now felt encouraged to stand up for themselves. The boy realized that, in speaking up, he was helping others find their strength, and that filled him with a new kind of pride. He had gone from feeling alone to becoming a source of inspiration for others. Meanwhile, his lawyer and community leaders continued their efforts to ensure that his case wouldn't be forgotten. They organized a series of meetings with local officials, pushing for improvements in how young people in the community were treated. They were determined to create new guidelines that would make interactions between law enforcement and young people safer and more respectful. One evening, the boy and his mom attended one of these community meetings. Sitting in the room, surrounded by people of all ages who were passionate about making things better, he felt like he was part of something truly meaningful. The leaders discussed plans for community outreach programs, including workshops where officers would meet with young people in a casual, friendly setting. The goal was to create understanding, to break down the barriers that had caused so much fear and mistrust. When one of the leaders asked if anyone wanted to share their thoughts, the boy raised his hand. He spoke about how these changes made him feel hopeful, and how he believed that if people were willing to learn and listen to each other, real change could happen. The people in the room nodded in agreement, and a few even thanked him afterward for his bravery and honesty. The more he got involved, the more he realized that his actions had a ripple effect. By standing up, he'd helped to inspire not just his community, but also himself. He was learning so much about strength, resilience, and the power of community. He could see that change wasn't instant and that it would take time, but he also knew that they were on the right path. The boy felt a deep sense of gratitude for everyone who had supported him along the way. From his mom, who had been there from the beginning, to the strangers who had reached out, to the friends he had made at these meetings, he felt surrounded by a network of people who believed in justice. He knew that this journey had been difficult, but he wouldn't change a thing. It had taught him about courage, compassion, and the impact one voice could have when it spoke the truth. As he walked home that evening with his mom, he felt hopeful. They talked about the future, about all the things they could still do to make the community better for everyone. He promised himself that he would keep speaking up, keep helping others find their voices, and keep working toward a future where everyone felt respected and safe. And as he looked around his neighborhood, he knew that the seeds of change had been planted. He couldn't wait to see how they would grow. In the weeks that followed, the boy found himself becoming more involved than ever. The community was buzzing with energy, and every meeting felt like a step closer to real change. He was proud to be part of something so meaningful, something that could make life better not just for him, but for everyone in his neighborhood. One day, he was asked to join a discussion panel at a town hall meeting. At first, he hesitated, feeling nervous about speaking in front of so many people. But he knew that his story had already touched lives and that his voice mattered. So he agreed. He prepared by writing down what he wanted to say, focusing on the importance of respect and the hope for a community where everyone felt safe. The night of the town hall, the room was packed. People from all over the area had come to listen, share their thoughts, and support the changes that were starting to happen. The boy looked around and felt a wave of nervous excitement. He was grateful to see familiar faces in the audience: his mom, his lawyer, friends from his neighborhood, and even some of the community leaders he had gotten to know. Their presence reminded him that he wasn't alone in this journey. When it was his turn to speak, he took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. His voice was calm but strong as he shared his experience once again, reminding everyone why he was there. He spoke about the fear he had felt, the support he had received, and the hope that filled him now. He thanked the people who had listened and those who were working to make things better. He talked about how these changes weren't just about fixing what had happened to him, but about creating a future where everyone, no matter who they were, could feel safe and respected. The room was silent as he spoke, and he could see that people were truly listening. When he finished, the crowd erupted into applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering, showing him that his words had made an impact. The boy felt a warmth in his heart, knowing that he was part of something much bigger than himself. After the town hall, several people came up to thank him. Some were young kids, looking up to him with admiration, while others were older community members who expressed their gratitude for his bravery. One man shook his hand and said, "You're not just speaking for yourself. You're speaking for all of us." The boy realized that his story had become a symbol of hope and strength for so many people. It was humbling, but it also filled him with a sense of purpose. Over the following days, he was invited to even more community events, each one focused on spreading awareness and building bridges between people. The boy felt a growing confidence, and he began to understand the true power of his voice. With each event, more people began to support the movement for change. Slowly, he noticed that things were starting to shift. Police officers were attending meetings and listening to the community. People were discussing ways to make interactions safer and more respectful for everyone, especially young people. But it wasn't just about meetings and speeches. The boy also saw change in his everyday life. He noticed that people seemed more willing to listen to each other, to understand instead of judge. He saw kids in his neighborhood starting to talk about their dreams and hopes with confidence, inspired by the example he had set. It was amazing to him how one experience, as painful as it had been, had sparked so much growth and unity. One day, as he was walking home, he spotted a group of kids playing basketball at the park. They waved him over, inviting him to join. As he played, he realized that he was now a part of something bigger than himself. He was no longer just the quiet kid from the neighborhood. He had become a role model, a symbol of strength and hope. The support he had once needed was now something he could give back to others. That night, he reflected on everything that had happened: the fear, the rally, the meetings, and the change he could feel taking root. He knew the journey was far from over. There was still work to be done, and there would still be challenges ahead. But he felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he was making a difference. As he lay in bed, he thought about the future, about how he could continue to use his voice and his story to bring about positive change. He felt grateful for everyone who had stood by him, who had believed in him, and who had shown him that one voice, even a young voice, could inspire a community to come together. And as he closed his eyes, he made a promise to himself. He would keep going, keep standing up, and keep working toward a world where everyone could feel safe, respected, and valued. As time went on, the boy continued to be an active part of his community's movement for change. He found that speaking out and sharing his story had not only transformed his life, but had also created a ripple effect, encouraging others to find their voices too. It was inspiring to see so many people come together, united by the desire for fairness and respect. One sunny Saturday, the community held a large festival in the park to celebrate their achievements and raise awareness about the ongoing fight for justice. There were colorful banners, booths set up by local organizations, and people sharing information about how to get involved. The boy was excited to see how many families and friends had come out to support the cause. It felt like a big family gathering, and he was proud to be part of it. At the festival, he was invited to speak again. This time, he stood in front of a crowd filled with smiling faces and hopeful eyes. As he took the microphone, he felt a sense of comfort wash over him. He had grown so much since that night when he was unfairly treated. Now, he stood strong, ready to share his journey once more. He began by thanking everyone for their support and for coming together as a community. He spoke about how they had all worked hard to raise awareness and push for change. He shared stories of people he had met along the way, each with their own struggles and victories. It felt good to highlight their experiences too, reminding everyone that they were all part of this movement. The crowd listened intently, and he could see how his words connected with them. He talked about the importance of standing together, of supporting one another, and how they all had the power to make a difference. As he spoke, he noticed people nodding and smiling, feeling inspired by the sense of unity that filled the air. The energy was infectious, and he could tell that everyone felt it. This was a moment of hope. After his speech, people approached him with words of encouragement. A little girl with bright eyes came up to him and said, "You made me feel brave. I want to stand up for my friends." Her words warmed his heart, and he realized just how much of an impact he was having on the younger generation. They were learning that it was okay to speak out and that their voices mattered. Throughout the day, the boy participated in activities, joining in on games and helping to run a booth where kids could draw and share their dreams for the future. It was wonderful to see so much creativity and enthusiasm. He listened to the children's hopes and aspirations, feeling a sense of responsibility to help them achieve those dreams. As the sun began to set, the festival wrapped up with a concert featuring local musicians. The atmosphere was filled with laughter and joy, and the boy felt a deep sense of belonging. He looked around at the faces of his friends and neighbors, realizing that this was what community was all about: supporting each other, celebrating victories, and standing together in difficult times. Later, as the festival came to a close, the boy gathered with his mom and friends. They reflected on the day, sharing their favorite moments and discussing how far they had come. His mom looked at him with pride, telling him how much he had grown and how proud she was of his courage. Her words made him feel even more determined to keep pushing for change. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought about everything that had happened over the past few months. He had faced challenges, but he had also seen the incredible strength of his community. He knew that there was still work to be done, and he felt motivated to keep moving forward. He realized that even small steps could lead to big changes over time. With a heart full of hope and determination, he drifted off to sleep, dreaming of a future where everyone could feel safe and respected. He knew that this was just the beginning of a long journey, but he was ready to take it on. He felt empowered, knowing that he was not alone and that together they could create a brighter, more inclusive world for everyone. And as he closed his eyes, he made a promise to himself. He would keep fighting for what was right, not just for himself, but for all those who needed a voice.